The moment I watched two United States postal inspectors walk up to Linda Carmichael's pristine colonial-style home with an arrest warrant, I felt a satisfaction so deep it almost made the previous 4 months of harassment worth it. Almost. Standing in my driveway with my wife Rachel and our mail carrier, whose grin was as wide as mine, I couldn't help but think back to how this whole nightmare started over something as simple as a mailbox. My name is David Torres. I'm 54 years old, and after 28 years working for the United States Postal Service, before retiring on partial disability following a back injury, I thought I knew everything there was to know about mail delivery regulations. What I didn't count on was moving into Meadowbrook Estates in Plano, Texas, and encountering Linda Carmichael, the HOA Architectural Review Committee chairwoman, who believed her authority extended beyond local covenants and into the realm of federal law. She was wrong. And watching those federal agents explain exactly how wrong she was while her neighbors gathered on their lawns was the kind of justice that makes you believe the system still works when you know how to use it. This is the story of how an HOA Karen's obsession with mailbox aesthetics led her to commit a federal crime, and how a retired postal worker used 3 decades of regulatory knowledge to deliver the most satisfying revenge I've ever experienced. All completely legal, totally justified, and absolutely worth every minute I spent documenting her descent into federal prosecution. Rachel and I moved into Meadowbrook Estates in late February, drawn by the excellent schools for our teenage daughter, Sophia. The quiet streets perfect for our morning walks. And honestly, after years of apartment living while saving for a down payment, just having our own house felt like we'd finally made it. The house was a beautiful single-story ranch with a 2-car garage, a decent backyard where Rachel could finally plant the vegetable garden she'd been dreaming about, and a front yard with a mature oak tree that provided perfect shade. The neighborhood was exactly what we'd hoped for. Tree-lined streets, well-maintained homes, families riding bikes on weekend mornings, and neighbors who actually waved and introduced themselves. I'd reviewed the HOA documents before closing, and they seemed reasonable enough. Standard restrictions on exterior paint colors from an approved pallet lawn maintenance requirements, no major structural changes without architectural committee approval, and the usual rules about parking and trash cans. The HOA fees were $85 monthly, which seemed fair for the community pool, landscaped entrance, and neighborhood park maintenance. Our mail carrier, a guy named Marcus, who I'd actually worked with years ago at the downtown sorting facility, was thrilled to see me when he delivered our first batch of forwarded mail. "Man, Torres, didn't know you moved to my route," he'd said, shaking my hand enthusiastically. "How's retirement treating you?" We'd chatted about mutual friends still working for USPS, complained about our various aches and pains, his knee, my back, and he'd warned me with a knowing look. "Watch out for the HOA lady on the architectural committee. Linda something. She's got opinions about everything, including how people should receive their mail." I'd laughed it off, figuring I could handle a busybody neighbor after dealing with difficult postal customers for nearly 3 decades. Looking back now, Marcus had tried to warn me, but I'd been too optimistic about our new beginning to see the storm clouds gathering. I first met Linda Carmichael exactly 9 days after we moved in, on a Thursday morning while I was installing our new mailbox. The previous owners had taken their decorative mailbox with them, which was their right since it wasn't attached to the house. So I'd purchased a nice, sturdy black metal mailbox from Home Depot, the kind with a rust-resistant coating and a red flag mounted on a 4x4 treated post that I'd set in concrete. I was tightening the final bolts when a silver Mercedes SUV pulled up to the curb, and out stepped a woman who looked like she'd stepped out of a country club catalog. Perfectly highlighted blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail, white capri pants without a single wrinkle, a pale pink polo shirt, designer sunglasses, and an expression that I would come to know intimately over the following months. The look of someone who had spotted a violation and was absolutely delighted to address it. "Excuse me," she called out, walking up my driveway with the confidence of someone who believed she owned the neighborhood. "I'm Linda Carmichael, chairwoman of the Architectural Review Committee. I don't believe that Mailbox has been approved." I straightened up, wiping sweat from my forehead. It was already pushing 80 degrees, and extended my hand for a polite handshake. "David Torres. Just moved in. Nice to meet you." She gave my hand the briefest possible touch before pulling back. "Yes, well, welcome to Meadowbrook Estates. However, all exterior modifications, including mailbox installations, require prior approval from the ARC. You'll need to submit Form 3B with photographs and specifications, wait for committee review, and upon approval, you may install an appropriate mailbox from our approved vendors list." She pulled a folded piece of paper from her pocket. She'd apparently come prepared, and held it out to me. I took it, genuinely confused. "It's just a standard mailbox," I said, gesturing to the completely ordinary black box I'd just installed. "I've been a postal worker for 28 years. This meets all USPS regulations for carrier delivery." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "That may be, but it doesn't meet Meadowbrook Estates' aesthetic standards. Section 4.7 of our covenants requires architectural harmony. This," she waved dismissively at my perfectly functional mailbox, "is not harmonious with our neighborhood character. You'll notice most homes have colonial-style mailboxes in white or cream." I looked around and realized she was right about one thing. Most of the nearby mailboxes were similar white decorative boxes with little roof-like tops, almost like miniature houses. But plenty of homes had different styles, including several black mailboxes like mine. "I see several homes with black mailboxes," I pointed out, trying to keep my tone friendly and reasonable. "How is mine different?" Linda's expression hardened slightly. "Those were installed before our current architectural guidelines were updated 2 years ago. They're grandfathered in. New installations must comply with current standards. I'll expect your removal of this non-compliant mailbox and submission of proper paperwork within 7 days." She turned on her heel and walked back to her Mercedes before I could respond, leaving me standing there, holding her stupid form and feeling the first stirrings of what would become intense frustration. That evening, I read through Section 4.7 of the CC&Rs carefully. Something I probably should have done more thoroughly before closing. The language was vague and subjective. "All exterior modifications shall maintain architectural harmony with the established neighborhood aesthetic, as determined by the Architectural Review Committee." The phrase, "as determined by the ARC," meant Linda essentially had unilateral authority to define what harmony meant. Rachel was annoyed when I told her about the encounter. "Can they actually make you take down a mailbox you just installed?" she asked, chopping vegetables for dinner with more force than necessary. "I mean, isn't mail delivery a federal thing?" Her question planted a seed in my mind. I'd spent nearly 3 decades working for USPS, but I'd been a carrier and then a sorting supervisor, not a regulations expert. Still, I knew enough to know that mail delivery did involve federal regulations, and federal law generally trumps local rules. "Let me do some research," I told her. "But first, I'll try to play nice. Maybe I can get approval for what I've already installed." I spent the next evening filling out Form 3B, which was absurdly detailed for a mailbox application. Dimensions, materials, color codes, manufacturer specifications, installation method, even photographs from 4 different angles. I submitted everything to the HOA office, a small rental space in a nearby strip mall where the management company kept limited office hours and paid the $50 architectural review fee that wasn't mentioned anywhere in the CC&Rs but was apparently required anyway. 3 weeks later, I received a form letter. Application denied. Proposed mailbox does not meet current aesthetic standards. Please resubmit with approved vendor selection. Approved vendors list attached. The attached list included exactly 3 vendors, all local companies that sold expensive decorative mailboxes ranging from $380 to $625 for a mailbox. My Home Depot mailbox had cost $47. This was clearly a racket, and I started to understand why Marcus had warned me. I decided to try one more diplomatic approach before things escalated. I called Linda's number, which was listed on the HOA website as the ARC contact. She answered on the 3rd ring. Architectural Review Committee. Linda speaking. I kept my tone professional and respectful. Hi, Linda. This is David Torres from 2847 Oak Haven. I received the denial on my mailbox application, and I was hoping we could discuss this. The approved vendors are significantly more expensive than standard mailboxes, and I'm concerned about the cost. Her response was immediate and dismissive. Mr. Torres, if you couldn't afford to maintain a home in Meadowbrook Estates to our standards, perhaps you should have considered a different neighborhood. The approved vendors ensure quality and aesthetic consistency. Your application is denied. Good day. She hung up before I could respond. I sat there, phone still in my hand, feeling anger rise in my chest. Rachel, who'd been listening from the kitchen, came into the living room with fire in her eyes. Did she seriously just say we can't afford to live here? David, I'm not spending $500 on a mailbox because some HOA Karen has a power trip. Sophia, doing homework at the dining table, looked up with concern. Are we in trouble with the neighborhood? She asked quietly. That's when I realized this wasn't just about money or principle anymore. This woman was making my daughter worry about whether we belonged in our own home. That's when I decided to stop playing defense and start doing what I did best: research federal regulations. I spent the next week diving deep into United States Postal Service regulations, specifically Title 39 of the Code of Federal Regulations, which governs mail delivery. What I discovered was fascinating, and, more importantly, potentially devastating to Linda's little kingdom. Here's what most people don't realize. Mail delivery is exclusively a federal function, and USPS regulations supersede local rules, including HOA covenants, when there's a conflict regarding mail receptacle requirements. 39 CFR paragraph 111.2 establishes that mailboxes must meet certain specifications for size, accessibility, and safety, but those specifications are set by USPS, not by HOAs. Even more interesting, I found USPS Publication 1-33, the Mail Receptacles Guide, which explicitly states that local regulations cannot require mailbox designs that conflict with Postal Service requirements. I also discovered something that would become crucial. 18 U.S.C. Parva the 1705 makes it a federal crime to willfully obstruct or delay mail delivery, and case law had established that unauthorized removal or destruction of approved mailboxes could fall under this statute. But the real gold mine came when I contacted the local postmaster, Sarah Chen, who I'd worked with years ago. "David, long time," she said warmly when I called. "What can I do for you?" I explained the situation, and I could hear her shaking her head over the phone. "HOAs try this periodically," she said with obvious frustration. "They don't understand that they can't interfere with mail service. If your mailbox meets our specifications, which any standard curbside box does, and our carrier can safely deliver to it, then it's approved by USPS, period. No HOA can override that." She paused, and I could hear her typing. "Tell you what, I'm going to send you an official letter on USPS letterhead confirming that your current mailbox installation meets all Postal Service requirements and is approved for mail delivery at your address. Keep that letter. If the HOA tries to remove your box, they're potentially interfering with federal mail service, which opens them up to some serious consequences." The letter arrived 4 days later, official and beautiful, stating in clear bureaucratic language that my mailbox was in full compliance with USPS regulations and approved for mail service delivery. I made 5 copies and put the original in my fireproof safe. Then I sent a copy to Linda via certified mail with a polite note explaining that my mailbox was federally approved and would not be removed. Her response came exactly 3 days later, and it wasn't a letter. On a Tuesday morning in late April, while Rachel and I were both at work and Sophia was at school, someone removed my mailbox. Not just removed it, they cut the bolts with an angle grinder, pulled the entire post out of the concrete, and hauled the whole thing away, leaving just a hole in my yard and concrete chunks scattered across my grass. Marcus called me at 11:47 a.m., furious. "David, I'm at your house right now, and your mailbox is gone. Completely gone. I can't deliver your mail, which means it's all going back to the post office. You need to fix this, man." I left work early, my back aching from the stress and the drive, and stood in my front yard staring at the empty hole where my mailbox had been that morning. 3 neighbors were outside, and I walked over to the nearest one, a retired gentleman named Bob who lived 2 doors down and had always been friendly. "Bob, did you see what happened to my mailbox?" I asked, already knowing the answer but needing confirmation. Bob looked uncomfortable. "Linda came by this morning with 2 guys in a pickup truck, around 9:30. They had power tools. She told me the mailbox was an unapproved installation and was being removed per HOA enforcement authority. David, I'm sorry, but nobody wants to get on her bad side. She's made life hell for people before." I thanked him and walked back to my house, pulling out my phone to photograph everything. The hole, the concrete chunks, the cut marks on the pieces that were left behind. Then I called the Plano Police Department and filed a report for theft and property damage. The responding officer, a young woman named Officer Martinez, took my statement and photographs. "This is technically a civil matter since it's HOA-related," she explained. "But the theft and property damage could potentially be criminal charges if you want to pursue it. You'll need to decide whether to press charges." I showed her the USPS letter confirming my mailbox approval. She read it carefully, then looked up with raised eyebrows. "So, your mailbox was federally approved, and she removed it anyway? That seems problematic." She made notes in her report. "I'd recommend you also contact the Postal Inspector's office. Interfering with mail delivery is serious business." That's when I knew exactly what I needed to do. I called the USPS Office of Inspector General hotline and filed a formal complaint for interference with mail service under 18 U.S.C. Parv 1705. Then I called Sarah Chen and told her what happened. The fury in her voice was immediate and gratifying. "She removed a federally approved mailbox? While you had an official USPS approval letter?" "David, I'm escalating this to our postal inspector immediately. This is not okay." That evening I installed a temporary mailbox, another standard black box on a post, and put a laminated copy of the USPS approval letter inside a weatherproof plastic sleeve attached to the post. I also installed a Ring doorbell camera pointed directly at my mailbox. Then I waited. It took exactly 4 days for Linda to make her next move, and this time I caught everything on camera. At 10:23 a.m. on Saturday morning, Linda's Mercedes pulled up. She got out, walked directly to my temporary mailbox, read the USPS letter, and then did something I honestly didn't expect. She tore the letter off the post, crumpled it up, threw it in my yard, and then spray-painted a large red X on my mailbox. The Ring camera captured her face, her license plate, her actions, and the audio of her muttering, "We'll see about federal approval," as she got back in her car. I downloaded the video immediately and sent copies to the police, the postal inspector, Sarah Chen, and my attorney. Yes, I'd retained a lawyer by this point, a woman named Jennifer Park, who specialized in property law and HOA disputes. Jennifer had been thrilled when I showed her the USPS letter. HOAs lose when they go up against federal regulations, she'd told me at our first meeting. They just don't realize it until it's too late. When I sent her the Ring video, she called me within an hour. "David, this is gold. She just committed vandalism on camera, and defacing or removing a federally approved mail receptacle can be charged under obstruction of mail statutes. Plus, you've now got a pattern of behavior. We can file for a restraining order and pursue criminal charges if you want to go that route." I was ready to go that route, but I wanted to see how deep Linda's hole would get first. The postal inspector assigned to my case, a man named Inspector Raymond Walsh, contacted me the following Tuesday. "Mr. Torres, I've reviewed your complaint and the evidence you've provided. I need to conduct an interview with you and inspect the situation personally. When are you available?" We met at my house on Thursday afternoon. Inspector Walsh was in his early 50s, professional and thorough, with the demeanor of someone who took his job very seriously. He photographed the mailbox with the spray-painted X, reviewed my Ring camera footage on his laptop, examined the USPS approval letter I'd been sent, and took detailed notes about the timeline. "Mr. Torres, interference with mail service is a federal offense that we take extremely seriously," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Based on what you've shown me, Ms. Carmichael has twice interfered with an approved mail receptacle, causing disruption to your mail service. I'll need to interview her, and depending on her response, we may pursue federal charges." He paused, looking at me directly. "I understand you're frustrated, but I need to know. Do you want to pursue this criminally, or would you prefer we handle it as a regulatory warning?" I thought about Sophia asking if we were in trouble, about Bob being too afraid to stand up for what was right, about the 11 other families Marcus had told me Linda had driven out of the neighborhood. "Inspector Walsh, I want you to pursue this to the fullest extent of the law," I said. "This isn't just about my mailbox. She's terrorizing an entire neighborhood, and someone needs to stop her." He nodded slowly. "Understood. I'll move forward with a formal investigation." While Inspector Walsh conducted his investigation, I decided to go on offense with my mailbox situation. And this is where my years of Postal Service knowledge really paid off. I researched a specific type of mailbox installation that would be absolutely untouchable by the HOA, a centralized mail delivery system. The next 2 weeks were gloriously quiet on the mailbox front, but I was busy on other fronts. I'd started talking systematically to neighbors who'd been affected by Linda's reign of terror, and what I discovered was appalling. There was Janet Rodriguez, who had been fined $3,200 for having solar panels installed without ARC approval, even though Texas state law explicitly protects homeowners' rights to install solar panels and prohibits HOAs from unreasonably restricting them. There was Marcus and Joy Williams, who'd received violation notices for having a basketball hoop in their driveway, despite multiple other homes having identical setups that Linda ignored. There was elderly Mr. Peterson, whose wife had recently passed away, and who'd been fined $850 for not maintaining his lawn to standards during the month he was grieving and arranging her funeral. Every single person had a story of Linda's selective enforcement, unreasonable demands, and complete lack of empathy. I started documenting everything in a spreadsheet. Names, dates, violations alleged, fines assessed, supporting evidence that showed selective enforcement or legal violations. Jennifer Park, my attorney, was building a case not just for my mailbox situation, but for a potential class action lawsuit against the HOA for systemic harassment and violation of Texas property code. Texas has fairly strong homeowner protections compared to some states. Texas property code, paragraph 209.305, requires HOAs to allow hearings before fines are assessed, and paragraph 209.006 requires notice and opportunity to cure violations before penalties are imposed. Linda had violated both statutes repeatedly. Jennifer was particularly excited about the solar panel case. Texas Property Code, paragraph 220.18, specifically prohibits HOAs from banning solar panels or making installation unreasonably difficult, she explained at one of our meetings. Ms. Rodriguez has grounds for not just getting her fines dismissed, but actually suing the HOA for attorney's fees and damages. And if we can prove a pattern of Linda violating state law, we can potentially get her removed from the board and even pursue personal liability. Meanwhile, Inspector Walsh had been conducting his investigation, and things were apparently progressing. He'd interviewed Linda, who, according to his brief phone update to me, had been uncooperative and hostile, claiming she had HOA authority to remove non-compliant structures and that mailboxes were subject to architectural review. He'd interviewed Marcus and other mail carriers who'd serviced the route, all of whom confirmed that Linda had caused ongoing problems with mail delivery in Meadowbrook Estates. He'd reviewed the Ring camera footage, the police reports, and all my documentation. Mr. Torres, I'm recommending criminal charges to the U.S. Attorney's Office, he told me during a phone call in late June. The evidence is clear, the intent is documented, and this isn't a minor infraction. She's disrupted federal mail service multiple times, despite being explicitly warned that your mailbox was federally approved. You should expect to hear about next steps within the next few weeks. That phone call felt like vindication, but I knew the real moment of justice was still coming. The moment arrived on July 18th, a Thursday afternoon that I will remember with satisfaction for the rest of my life. Rachel and I were both home, and I was actually showing Tom the new sprinkler system I'd installed, with proper ARC approval, ironically, since I'd learned to pick my battles, when an unmarked black sedan pulled up to Linda's house, followed by a Plano police cruiser. Two people in business attire got out of the sedan, Inspector Walsh and a woman I didn't recognize, and approached Linda's front door. Tom and I exchanged glances. "Is that?" he started. "Postal inspectors," I confirmed, unable to keep the smile off my face. We watched as Linda answered her door, and even from 3 houses away, we could see the moment she realized this wasn't a friendly visit. The conversation at her doorway lasted about 5 minutes before Inspector Walsh handed her some papers. She started shaking her head vehemently, her voice rising loud enough that we could hear her shouting but not make out specific words. Then the woman with Inspector Walsh, who I later learned was Assistant U.S. Attorney Rebecca Morrison, said something that made Linda go pale. The Plano police officer stepped forward, and Linda was placed under arrest. They actually handcuffed her right there on her front porch, read her Miranda rights while neighbors started emerging from their houses, and escorted her to the police cruiser. Her husband, a quiet man named Donald, who I'd only met once and who seemed perpetually exhausted, stood in the doorway looking shocked and confused. Inspector Walsh walked over to where Tom and I were standing, trying to look casual and failing miserably. "Mr. Torres," he said formally, though there was a hint of a smile in his eyes, "I wanted to inform you that Ms. Carmichael has been arrested on federal charges of obstruction of correspondence under 18 U.S.C., par for 1705, as well as local charges of theft and property damage. The U.S. Attorney's Office has decided to prosecute this case as a deterrent to others who might interfere with Postal Service operations. Tom let out a low whistle. What kind of penalties are we talking about? Inspector Walsh's expression became serious. For the federal charge alone, she's looking at up to 3 years in federal prison and fines up to $250,000, though that's the statutory maximum. More realistically, if convicted, she'll likely face probation, substantial fines, restitution, and community service. But the message is clear. You don't interfere with the U.S. Mail. As the police cruiser drove away with Linda in the back seat, I felt a wave of satisfaction wash over me, but it was tempered with something else. Relief. Relief that it was over. Relief that I wouldn't have to keep fighting. Relief that my family could finally feel at peace in our home. Rachel came out and stood next to me, taking my hand. "Is it really over?" she asked quietly. I squeezed her hand. "Not quite yet, but we're getting there." The fallout from Linda's arrest was swift and dramatic. Within 48 hours, an emergency HOA board meeting was called, and Linda was removed from her position as Architectural Review Committee chairwoman by a unanimous vote of the remaining board members, who were suddenly very eager to distance themselves from her actions. Her arrest had made the local news. HOA Official Arrested for Interfering with Mail Delivery was the headline on the Plano Star-Courier website, and the story had been picked up by several Dallas news stations. The comments sections were full of people sharing their own HOA horror stories and expressing satisfaction that someone had finally been held accountable. The new interim ARC chairman, a reasonable guy named Paul Chen, who was an architect by profession, reached out to me personally to apologize for the harassment I'd endured and to inform me that the committee was conducting a comprehensive review of all recent enforcement actions. Linda operated with essentially no oversight, he told me during a phone call. The rest of the board just assumed she knew what she was doing, and frankly, nobody wanted to deal with her temper. We are implementing new policies requiring committee votes for all enforcement actions and appeals processes for homeowners who feel they've been unfairly targeted. Better yet, he informed me that my approved vendor requirement was being eliminated. We're revising Section 4.7 to allow any mailbox that meets USPS specifications and is maintained in good condition. The approved vendor list was, frankly, a kickback scheme. Linda's brother-in-law owns one of those companies. We're getting rid of it. Within 2 weeks, 5 other families who'd been fined by Linda had their violations dismissed and their fines refunded. Janet Rodriguez's $3,200 in solar panel fines were not only refunded, but the HOA paid her an additional $5,000 in settlement to avoid a lawsuit under Texas Property Code. The Williams family's basketball hoop violations were dismissed, and Mr. Peterson received a personal apology and a refund of his $850 in lawn maintenance fines, plus the board sent flowers and a donation to the charity his late wife had supported. Jennifer Park negotiated a settlement on my behalf. Full restitution for all my expenses, including the 2 mailboxes Linda destroyed. Legal fees, the Ring camera I'd purchased specifically for documentation, and $15,000 in damages for harassment and emotional distress. The HOA's insurance company paid everything without going to trial, wanting to avoid the publicity of a lawsuit. Linda's criminal case moved through the system over the next several months. She ultimately pled guilty to reduced federal charges, 1 count of obstruction of correspondence, and received 2 years probation, 300 hours of community service, a $5,000 fine, and was ordered to pay $2,400 in restitution to me for property damage and expenses. She and her husband moved out of Meadowbrook Estates within 6 weeks of her arrest, quietly listing their house and relocating to somewhere in Oklahoma. Good riddance! But the best part of this whole saga wasn't the legal victory or the financial settlement or even watching Linda get arrested, though I'll admit that was deeply satisfying. The best part was watching Meadowbrook Estates transform from a neighborhood living in fear of an HOA tyrant into an actual community. Without Linda's iron-fisted enforcement of arbitrary rules, people started relaxing, talking to each other, and actually enjoying their homes. Tom organized a neighborhood barbecue in August that drew almost 40 families. The first community event in years that wasn't a mandatory HOA meeting. People brought their kids, their dogs, their various lawn chairs, and everyone just had a genuinely good time. Janet Rodriguez brought her famous enchiladas. The Williams family set up their basketball hoop in the cul-de-sac for an impromptu kids tournament. And Mr. Peterson showed up with photo albums of his late wife sharing memories with neighbors who had been too intimidated by Linda's atmosphere of hostility to properly support him during his grief. Rachel's vegetable garden became a neighborhood attraction. She started sharing tomatoes, peppers, and herbs with anyone who wanted them, and 3 other families started their own gardens. Sophia made friends with kids she'd been too nervous to approach before, and our house became the hangout spot where teenagers gathered on Friday nights to watch movies and eat too much pizza. The new HOA board implemented transparent policies, published meeting minutes online, created a clear appeals process, and most importantly, started treating homeowners like valued community members rather than subjects to be controlled. Property values actually increased over the following year. Turns out, people will pay premium prices to live in a neighborhood with a reasonable HOA. As for my mailbox situation, the federal CBU stayed right where USPS installed it, untouchable and perfect. Marcus delivers my mail with a smile every day, often stopping to chat about the old days or share Postal Service gossip. Tom and I maintain the area around the CBU together, keeping it landscaped and clean, and it's become a sort of neighborhood symbol of standing up to tyranny. Several neighbors have told me they show it to friends as the mailbox that got an HOA Karen arrested, and it never gets old. Looking back on those 4 months of harassment, documentation, and ultimately justice, I learned some valuable lessons about HOAs, federal regulations, and the importance of knowing your rights. First, federal law trumps local rules every single time. HOAs love to pretend they have unlimited authority, but they're still subject to state and federal laws that limit their power. Second, documentation is everything. Without my Ring camera footage, USPS approval letter, photographs, and detailed timeline, this case would have been much harder to prove. Third, you are not alone. Almost every neighborhood has other victims of HOA overreach who are waiting for someone to stand up first. Once I started organizing neighbors, the support and shared evidence became overwhelming. And fourth, sometimes the system actually works. I'll be honest. I went into this expecting to have to fight bureaucracy and indifference, but Inspector Walsh, AUSA Morrison, and Sarah Chen at USPS all took my complaint seriously and acted decisively. Was it worth the stress, the expense, and the months of harassment? Absolutely. Not just for the satisfaction of watching Linda face consequences for her actions, but for Sophia not having to worry about whether we belong in our own home. For Rachel, being able to plant her garden without fear for Tom and Janet and all the other neighbors who can finally breathe easy. If you're dealing with an HOA Karen who's overstepped her authority, document everything, know your rights, research applicable laws, and don't be afraid to stand up. The tyrant in your neighborhood is probably violating multiple statutes and just counting on you being too intimidated or too tired to fight back. Sometimes it takes a retired postal worker who knows federal mail regulations to deliver the justice your community deserves. Pun absolutely intended. So that's how an HOA Karen's obsession with mailbox aesthetics ended with federal charges, a criminal record, and her fleeing the state in disgrace. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you dealt with an out-of-control HOA or a board member who thinks they're above the law? What was the most ridiculous violation notice you've ever received? Drop your story in the comments below. I read every single one, and your experience might be featured in a future video. If this story gave you that sweet satisfaction of justice served, do me a huge favor and smash that like button. It genuinely helps the channel grow and means I can keep bringing you these stories of HOA karma every single day. And if you're not already subscribed, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. Trust me, tomorrow's tale is going to blow your mind, and you absolutely cannot afford to miss it. Speaking of HOAs, learning extremely painful lessons about choosing the wrong target, tomorrow I'm bringing you a story that takes property rights revenge to a whole new level. Imagine an HOA president so arrogant that she actually parked her $85,000 luxury SUV on a homeowner's private lot. Not the street, not a common area, but his actual deeded property that he'd specifically posted with "no parking" signs, and just left it there while she went on vacation, assuming he wouldn't dare touch her precious vehicle. What she didn't know was that the property owner was a master welder who had recently been laid off and had 2 weeks with nothing but time tools and a completely legal right to secure his own property against trespassers. I'm not going to spoil exactly what happened, but let us just say that when Karen returned from her Caribbean cruise, expecting to drive away in her pristine Mercedes, what she found instead led to police involvement, a viral news story, a lawsuit that backfired spectacularly, and a legal precedent that every property rights attorney in Texas now cites in training materials. The breakdown of how a homeowner legally defended his property rights, while an entitled HOA president learned that private property means private property, is absolutely epic. This isn't just about a car, it's about the moment an entire community watched their HOA president realize she'd messed with someone who understood property law better than she did, and the cascading consequences that followed. Tomorrow, same time, and I'm telling you right now, you need to make sure you're subscribed with that notification bell turned on, because this story is going to absolutely blow up. The legal destruction, the public humiliation, and the ultimate justice are the kind of content that'll have you cheering out loud. See you tomorrow for what might be the most satisfying HOA takedown I've ever covered.